Easy to get into the war and very hard to get out of one, because it creates its own momentum of attrition, loss, sacrifice that must be justified. Yes, sir.
I have a question, kind of more about the outrage that you were speaking of. I'm sure you've heard of the term, the rally behind the flag syndrome.
Mm-hmm. That's why the flags were on the
exactly. Which, from my understanding, at least what I've read, is a trend that has happened before in this country as well as other countries, and it has more to do with the kind of natural human psychology of a nation of people to kind of, want to defend themselves and to come together in some way. And so when I think about the September 11th bombings and anything like that, how much of looking at this as something as outrage is really just part of that trend of us realizing, oh, this is another one of the rally behind the flag syndromes. And so I'm curious what you think about, the idea that there's, if we're going to look at some kind of like policy implication of that, I mean, what can you kind of create out of that, aside from the fact that you recognize there needs to be leaders of a nation of peoples that are able to use the resources around them and the knowledge to understand, okay, the public opinion is very delicate right now, but we ultimately have to make the right decision. So I'm wondering, if it is something about outrage and that we need to look back at ourselves and kind of question that. At the same time, I'm just wondering, what could we do if this were to happen again?
First of all, I agree with you entirely about the rally around the flag and outrage being wrapped together. There's a theory in social psychology which I find very attractive. It's called terror management theory. Now, terror management theory isn't about terrorism. The terror in terror management theory is the human capacity to foresee your own death, and then you must somehow deal with that, and you do it by creating a worldview, either religious or secular, or a combination of them, that allows you to grant yourself a kind of literal or psychological immortality, or symbolic immortality. When 9/11 came, these guys did a lot of writing. Okay, you're absolutely right. I mean, the rally around the flag is to identify your in-group, and one of the first responses is to castigate, to define, to shove aside the others, okay, whatever they might be. It's a natural tendency. But I also think that what terror management theory does is it teaches you to expect that kind of thing and then to question it. One of the reasons I'm talking about outrage is it's come out of the courses I teach. I'm trying to prepare my students to deal with terrorism as citizens, to avoid that first impulse of rallying around people like you and shoving aside those who aren't like you, and seeking to sort of demonstrate your solidarity by actions against others. I think it's natural, but I think it's also controllable, and I think it's understandable. Whether or not we're going to learn, I don't know. I mean, I'm a historian, I don't have any crystal ball. But I think it's valuable to talk about the things I'm talking about today, to be more rational in one's response later on.
I mean, I think it's very valuable to talk about this. I'm just wondering if it's state leadership or
I would say both.
Yes.
I would say both. There's a lady here.
I did want to remark, it does come from the grassroots, because 9/11 changed my life forever. I'm a military mom. I had a soldier who served in Iraq. And even though I'm very proud of him, and he did a great job as a soldier, and he kept a lot of people alive with his actions, he was thrust into a situation that was created by people rallying around the flag. And I'm proud of my country. I consider myself a patriot. But while I was going to a support group, basically for my own mental health, you know, before actually we invaded Iraq, but when we were involved in the Afghani initially, it was very difficult for me to be around some of these people because they were so upset with Senator Dick Durbin because he was one of those few who stood up and voted against giving the president the authority to go into Iraq. And I felt he was right. But I had to be very careful what I was saying because I felt in danger of my life because I disagreed with the people around me. I was ostracized by family, friends, because I wasn't patriotic. I didn't want to grab a whatever and get on a boat and head for Iraq. And yet I knew they were headed headlong into something very, very stupid. I mean, my father is a World War II veteran, and I grew up in the Vietnam era. I know that war is not red, white, and blue, that it's red and dead.
You know,
And so it comes from the grassroots.
I agree with you.
It's not the leaders so much. Yes, we follow them blindly. But it comes from the grassroots, and each person must think for themselves, and they must think individually, and they must carry something on their heart that says, wait a minute, let's stop and think, what is prudent?
I was brought out to speak to, first of all, thank you for your family's sacrifice. But I was brought out to talk to 1st Battalion, 10th Marines, right before they were going to deploy to Iraq, about a year after the war. And the colonel who invited me was a real reader of history. I went in for what was supposed to be a symbolic visit, and we talked for 2 hours. And he says, I don't know what this war is about. I don't know why I've got to send my guys. You know, his job was to obey the orders of the administration. But here's a full colonel, a gung-ho Marine, and he was asking me, what is this all about? And I said, I don't know either, but then Zinni, who was a great Marine, was against the war from the first place. You'd be surprised how intelligent a lot of the military leadership is about these issues, how intelligent they are. But they have to follow political orders, and I think that those political orders, yes, they can be manipulated, absolutely. People can be convinced to believe what they want to believe, but they still kind of have to believe it. And I think when you look at the polls of American popular opinion from 9/11 all the way, until very recently on the Iraqi involvement, it's amazing that people can still believe that way, but they do. And we can point to all the facts in the world, but there's something